broken bones, shattered facial structures, eye trauma, permanent blindness, and these really serious, debilitating brain injuries.
Yeah.
These are the documented consequences of a whole family of weapon systems, projectiles, chemical agents that get manufactured and sold, all around the world under this chillingly soft label.
Less lethal.
That term, less lethal, it suggests something precise, controlled, almost humanitarian. But the reality that's playing out on the streets during protests globally, well, it tells a much darker, much more brutal story.
Right.
What our sources are really highlighting is that so much of this technology, and maybe more importantly, the permissive regulatory environment that lets it just flourish, it's exported globally by America's own industry. We're looking at a shadowy, multi-billion-dollar business that basically thrives in the cracks of international law. And that's what this deep dive is all about. We want to understand this out-of-control, global spread of crowd control tech. Our mission is to take a really hard look at its origins right here in the U.S., the critical lack of any real oversight, and the immense, often just ignored human cost.
And when you look at the last few years of civil unrest, the pattern is it's unmistakable. The ubiquity is staggering.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. I mean, think of the sheer volume of these devices used in recent mass protests. You got Hong Kong and Santiago in 2019, then Minneapolis, Portland in the summer of 2020, Tehran, Shanghai in 2022. This isn't just a local issue. It's a clear worldwide pattern.
And it's tied to something bigger.
Oh, absolutely. It's tied directly to rising economic inequality, political turmoil, and the state response to that, which is this aggressive push to contain public dissent. These are the tools of internal state violence, and they're being exported globally.
And to really ground this, to understand the real cost, we need to focus on one specific piece of U.S.-made hardware. It kind of represents a new high watermark for this whole overlooked business. We're talking about a remote-controlled, high-capacity multi-launcher called the Venom.
The Venom. It was made by a U.S. firm, Combined Systems, and deployed in Colombia back in 2021 with devastating and lethal results.
Yeah.
That one incident, it gives us this visceral case study to how these so-called less lethal weapons are used, how indiscriminately they're used against civilians.
And why the system fails to hold anyone accountable.
Exactly. Why the producers are never held accountable for the destruction they enable.
Okay, let's unpack this. And let's start on the streets of a small city in Colombia, where this global industry showed its deadly impact firsthand.
So we're in the spring of 2021 in Popayán, Colombia. It's a city maybe 250 miles southwest of Bogotá. And at the time, the entire country is it's engulfed in this massive general strike that's been going on for over 2 weeks.
And the trigger for that strike was a tax increase.
Right. A series of proposed tax increases, yeah. And you have to remember the context. This was during a severe COVID shutdown that had just cratered the economy. So people were already under immense strain.
It's a recipe for massive friction.
Absolutely. But as the protests grew, so did the state's response. And the focus of the demonstrators, it started to shift. It moved away from the tax bill and more toward the constant issue of police brutality.
And there was a specific event in Popayán that really lit the fuse.
There was a tragic one, the death by suicide of a local 17-year-old named Alison Melendez. She died the morning after she alleged she'd been sexually assaulted while in police custody.
Wow.
Her death caused the city to just erupt in this renewed, very specific rage against the security forces.
So that brings us to the front line that afternoon. You've got scores of young protesters crouching behind these makeshift shields.
Plywood, metal drums, yeah, anything they could find.
Trying to hold the line against heavily armored riot police. And one of those protesters was Sebastian Quintero Munera.
Munera was a 22-year-old engineering student. He was right there in it, taking cover behind a piece of plywood that was spray-painted with the phrase, "Allison, we are with you," a direct reference to the teen's death.
So if you can just picture the scene for a moment, riot police are spread out. There are these plumes of tear gas already hanging in the air.
Right, so it's already a very confrontational environment.
But then sitting on the tree-lined median that divided the boulevard was this unfamiliar piece of equipment.
Yeah, it was basically a box with this array of metal tubes sticking out, all mounted on a little tripod. I mean, if you didn't know military hardware, you might think it was for launching fireworks at a festival or something.
Except for one critical difference.
The tubes were aimed horizontally, directly at the street, at the crowd, not at the sky.
And this was the Venom, the remote-controlled launcher made by Combined Systems out of Jamestown, Pennsylvania. The capacity of this thing is It's shocking.
It's designed to fire up to 30 tear gas or flashbang canisters in rapid succession. It's like a massive automated shotgun aimed at a crowd of people.
And this isn't some off-the-shelf police item. It has a military history.
A very distinct one. The Venom has been widely used by the U.S. Marine Corps for combat operations in Iraq, where the objective is suppressing and neutralizing enemy combatants over a wide area. So deploying it here against civilian protesters, that was a clear sign of extreme military-grade escalation.
The impact then was instantaneous.
Overwhelming. No verbal warning, no time to disperse. Just a rapid succession of deafening blasts, a barrage of these blunt, barely visible projectiles ricocheting off everything, shields, bodies. The street was instantly filled with this dense, choking fog.
And protesters are just scrambling.
Scrambling, gasping for air, tripping over things, just total chaos.
Human Rights Watch weighed in on this, or?
They did. Jose Miguel Vivanco, who was the director of their Americas division, he was emphatic. He said the deployment of the Venom in Colombia was the first documented use of this military weapon in Latin America, and he called it one of the most brutal examples of its indiscriminate use against civilians anywhere in the world.
And the immediate cost of that indiscriminate action fell on Sebastian Hunera.
When the smoke cleared, he was on the ground, bleeding out onto the pavement. He had a fist-sized hole in his neck.
My God.
Street medics tried to resuscitate him, but the wound was just too massive. It was too immediate.
His death in Popayán really forces us to ask this fundamental question. How does an American-made military launcher assembled 3,000 miles away in the Rust Belt end up killing a student in Colombia?
And the answer, really, it lies in the deeply flawed premise of the entire industry, the central idea that has to be challenged.
Which is the rhetoric itself, the whole justification for these weapons in the first place. The story they sell is that less lethal devices are a humane alternative to conventional arms.
Right. They supposedly let security forces suppress a riot without a massacre.
It's a carefully crafted message. They paint the industry as this frontier of high-tech innovation, suggesting, futuristic things like sticky foam or net guns are right around the corner.
But that glossy rhetoric, it completely hides the reality, which is technological stagnation and the brutal core of the weapons that are actually being used.
That's a huge point, because when you actually look at the menu of less lethal weapons that dominate the market, the tech is incredibly old. Tear gas.
We're talking nearly 100 years old. Rubber bullets are 50, flashbangs 45. Even tasers are over 30 years old now.
So the innovation isn't in the munition itself, which is still dangerous and blunt.
No, it's in the delivery platform, like the multi-launcher.
Yeah.
They just found a faster, wider, more automated way to deploy the same old brutality.
And that matters because the language, the less lethal label, it masks just how damaging these things can be.
It absolutely does. I mean, even if they're not designed to kill, the consequences are anything but minor. We are talking about severe, life-altering physical trauma. A launched tear gas canister or a rubber bullet can easily break limbs, shatter skulls.
Destroy eyesight, hearing, cause concussions.
Exactly. There's a physician, Rohini Har, who's a human rights activist. She put it very clearly. These devices are as dangerous as the person firing them wants them to be.
And we're seeing patterns of injury across the globe.
Yeah.
The ocular epidemic in Chile is just horrifying.
It became a symbol of state violence. During the 2019 protests, there were so many eye wounds from projectiles that the image of an eye bandage became a nationwide symbol of resistance.
The symbol of the trauma.
The Chilean Ophthalmology Society called it the largest outbreak of such injuries ever registered in a conflict zone. That wasn't an accident. That was a consequence of the weapon and how it was used.
Which brings up the biggest question of all. Why is an industry that creates these consequences on a global scale so unregulated?
The oversight vacuum is astounding. I mean, truly, it starts at the international level.
Let's break down the loopholes. So, tear gas. It's prohibited for use in war.
Right. Since the 1925 Geneva Protocol, there's this overwhelming revulsion to chemical weapons after World War I. But there's a huge loophole.
No international treaty bans a country from using it on its own citizens.
Exactly. Banned for the battlefield, but sanctioned for the streets. And it gets worse.
The Arms Trade Treaty.
The 2013 Arms Trade Treaty, a binding agreement meant to stop weapon sales to countries with documented human rights abuses. Less lethal weapons are specifically and intentionally excluded from it.
So the very tools used to crush dissent are given a free pass.
A total free pass. It undermines the entire point of the treaty. And it doesn't get any better when you look at the regulations here in the U.S., the world's leading producer.
There's basically no federal law that specifically regulates the safety or function of these weapons.
None. The manufacturers have firearm and explosive licenses, sure, but those are about who can make them and how they handle explosives. It doesn't say anything about whether the product itself is actually safe or, less lethal.
And crucially, they're all legally exempt from inspection by the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the CPSC.
That exemption is key. The CPSC is the agency that's supposed to make sure products are safe for the public. But because these are classified as firearms, the CPSC is legally barred from even looking at them. It's a massive, dangerous blind spot.
The analogy our sources use is perfect here. It says the less lethals industry is to the armaments trade what dietary supplements are to the pharmaceutical industry.
A supposedly more benign sector that is, in practice, largely unsupervised and often slipshod. That sums it up perfectly. There's no one checking if the central promise of the product, that it has reduced lethality, is actually true.
So no rules on the chemical makeup of their tear gas, no safety guidelines on projectile speed.
Nothing. And this total lack of oversight in the factory today is directly tied to a historical push going back 100 years to legitimize these former weapons of war.
And to understand that, you have to go back to Western Pennsylvania. The Rust Belt region where the Venom launcher was made, it's been a critical hub for this market for nearly a century. This isn't some new industry.
Not at all. Its roots go straight back to the trenches of World War I, and specifically to the U.S. Army's Chemical Warfare Service, the CWS.
The CWS was formed after Germany first used chlorine gas, and the U.S. ramped up production fast.
Massively. By the end of the war, the U.S. was producing more poison gas than Germany, Britain, and France combined. So after the armistice, they had these huge stockpiles.
And they knew a ban was coming.
They did. The public revulsion was overwhelming, and they correctly anticipated the 1925 Geneva Protocol. So they needed to find a new, politically acceptable market for their arsenals.
And that sparked this huge, coordinated rebranding campaign.
In the early 1920s, yeah. The Chemical Warfare Service basically helped private firms launder the reputation of these terrifying gases. They tried to rebrand them as harmless tools for civilian use.
It's incredible, taking banned battlefield poisons and trying to market them like a new home appliance.
That's essentially what they did. The generals gave these new companies product samples, chemical expertise, marketing support. The early products were things like bank vaults with tear gas tripwires or home security alarms.
Trying to move the image of gas from the trenches to the bank vault.
The turning point, though, the moment that really cemented the false binary that still runs this industry, came in 1921. The CWS partnered with the Philadelphia police for a big public test of tear gas.
And what happened?
They had 200 volunteer police officers experience the effects, the choking, the burning eyes, all of it. And their response was overwhelmingly enthusiastic.
They loved it.
They did. An organizer of the test wrote a report that said the demo showed that gas, intelligently used, was not only a most effective but a most humane method. And there it is. That's the foundation of the whole narrative.
The idea that your only choice is gas or lethal force, so therefore gas is humane.
Exactly. And after that experiment, law enforcement across the country adopted it rapidly. The dominant manufacturer for decades was a company called Federal Laboratories, or Fed Labs, right outside Pittsburgh. They're chemists, trained by the CWS, developed the munitions used against labor strikes in the 30s, anti-war protests, civil rights marches.
Fed Labs was eventually dissolved in the 90s.
It was in 1994, but its legacy was immediately picked up by these smaller manufacturers who operate today with that same minimal accountability and who profit directly from that century-old rebranding campaign.
Which brings us to the modern players. Combined Systems, the maker of the Venom, and another company, Non-Lethal Technologies.
Both rooted in that Western Pennsylvania heritage, and both central to the global supply chain of suppression.
Combined Systems was founded in '81, and they grew fast, buying up patents, adding launchers to their inventory. And they got a huge boost from federal programs that were transferring military hardware to local police forces across the U.S.
But their business model was always international. They had lucrative contracts with the Israeli military, the Egyptian police. They were supplying state-controlled tools far beyond U.S. borders.
And when global turmoil spiked in the 2010s, demand just exploded.
A former employee, Larry Gearhart, he recalled the demand during the Arab Spring. He said, and this is quote, "When these riots broke out, they loved it. Every time something broke out somewhere, we got the orders, rush, rush, rush them out."
That just perfectly captures the cynical profit motive. Civil conflict is a quarterly earnings booster.
It is, but Just like in the World War I chemical plants, manufacturing these munitions today is still a profoundly dangerous job. There's a severe internal cost to the workers themselves.
Former employees at Combined Systems called the factory a glorified sweatshop. Gearhart described workers in what they called the gas house having burning eyes and throats all the time.
And the company's safety record backs that up. OSHA cited them 27 times between 2009 and 2016 for serious violations.
Not minor stuff.
No, things like improper storage of propane tanks, failure to train employees on hazardous materials, not providing mandated safety equipment. Real dangerous negligence.
And it had consequences. In 2020, OSHA found their poor safety management led to a chain reaction of explosions that injured 5 workers.
And the danger wasn't just contained inside the plant. They faced a lawsuit from a neighbor who alleged finding spent munitions all over their property, enduring clouds of tear gas drifting across their yard. So it was impacting the local community too.
And then there's the other company, Non-Lethal Technologies.
Just a couple hours away in Homer City, founded by former Fed Labs chemists in '94, and if anything, their operations have been described as even more slipshod.
The analogy from a former secretary there was pretty vivid.
Yeah, Shauna McCutcheons. She said, think Breaking Bad, but instead of meth, it's tear gas.
Wow.
A former employee described how they tested flashbangs. They didn't have special facilities. They just dropped them in a burn barrel outside the building. The explosions were so powerful, the insulation would move on the walls inside.
And he claimed it caused permanent hearing loss.
He did. But the most chilling part is how local authorities view the plant. The county emergency management director confirmed they have a special response strategy for fires there because of one specific chemical risk.
What's that?
He said, when you burn tear gas at certain temperatures, it turns into cyanide.
Cyanide gas.
Cyanide gas. So their emergency plan is to set up air monitoring downwind to tell local residents if they need to shelter in place or get the hell out.
That's insane. The risk of a mass casualty event is right there, and yet they operate outside the kind of public safety scrutiny that other industries face.
And that brings us right back to that regulatory gap. They have the basic licenses to handle explosives, but there are 0 federal rules to ensure the reduced lethality of their products. No one is checking. The less lethal label is a promise the government never, ever verifies.
Now, we have to acknowledge the official argument from police. They maintain that these weapons are a necessary tool to prevent far worse violence.
Right. The president of the Pittsburgh Police Union argued during the 2020 protests that without tear gas and rubber bullets, they'd be forced back into the kind of brutality seen in Chicago in 1968.
The false binary again.
In its clearest form. Use these munitions or it's unrestrained physical brutality. But history shows us that's a choice of doctrine, not a necessity.
Because there was an alternative. After the violence of the 60s, there was a new model of protest policing called negotiated management.
And that model held sway for decades. The idea was that police should try to preserve both public safety and First Amendment rights at the same time. Officers were trained to be guides, not aggressors. They'd set clear boundaries, even plan arrests in advance with organizers to de-escalate.
So what happened to it?
The breakdown really started in 1999 at the Seattle WTO protests. A small group of protesters broke through police lines, and the chief at the time, Norm Stamper, he approved the indiscriminate use of tear gas and other less lethals.
A decision he later regretted.
Deeply. He called it the worst mistake of my career, noting they used chemical agents against nonviolent protesters who were far away from any confrontation. But the damage was done. Negotiated management fell out of favor, and reliance on mass deployment of less lethals just surged.
And what's fascinating here is the lack of research to back this shift up. There's tons of data on the harm, but almost none on the benefits.
The evidence is remarkably thin. There's one widely cited study from 2009 that showed reduced injuries when things like tasers and pepper spray were used in daily patrol work. But that's against single individuals.
It doesn't apply to spraying projectiles and gas into a massive crowd.
Not at all. The evidence to support that kind of widespread deployment, it just isn't there. But the evidence for the damage has piled up dramatically.
Brian Kastner, a weapons expert for Amnesty International, he warns these weapons are easily and commonly abused when they're shot randomly at crowds.
He says police chiefs need much stricter rules. Unless your officers have a specific target, a single person posing a direct threat, then don't take the shot.
And the data on injuries backs him up. Since 2018, Amnesty has verified over 500 videos from 31 countries showing misuse.
And the stats on serious injury are chilling. A 2017 review in the British Medical Journal found 53 deaths cited in studies on rubber bullets alone. A 2015 ProPublica investigation found at least 50 Americans seriously injured, maimed, or killed by flashbangs since 2000.
And the American Academy of Ophthalmology, seeing all the people blinded, has just called for law enforcement to stop using rubber bullets completely.
So the evidence is overwhelming. These are not reliably less lethal. They're highly dangerous weapons used globally with no real accountability or validated need, all marketed under this banner of restraint.
And for me, this whole subject it's intensely personal. I know the impact of these weapons firsthand. While I was covering protests outside the White House in D.C. back in May of 2020, I was shot in the face with one of these projectiles.
An absolute devastating injury.
I fell to the ground, and when I took my hand away from my face, my right eye, my dominant eye as a photojournalist, it was sightless.
You suffered a partially detached retina, required multiple surgeries, a permanent implant, and you're left with permanent sight loss in that eye.
Exactly. I can only see shadows and silhouettes. And my recovery, my focus since then, led me to find other victims across the globe, which is how we get back to Sebastian Manera in Popayan.
In the aftermath of his death, the community there rallied. Within weeks, a local law firm filed a complaint trying to get a judicial order to prohibit the police from using the venom launcher.
And a judge actually sided with them at first.
For a moment, yeah. In June 2021, a judge ordered the police to suspend use of the venom until officers were properly trained. But that victory was temporary. The decree was lifted just a month later.
And the violence continued.
The thing is, the indiscriminate nature of the venom was made so much worse by how it was misused. The manufacturer's training says you should use a parabolic launch, an arc.
To disperse it over an area.
Right. But the police in Popayan, they set the weapon up on the ground. They fired it directly, horizontally into the crowd. That transforms it from a suppression tool into a targeted, dangerous projectile system.
And we saw a spike in those eye injuries there, too, just like in Chile.
Tragically, yes. An aspiring tattoo artist named Daniel James was hit in the face by a tear gas canister. It exploded his right eye, caused hemorrhaging in his left, broke multiple facial bones. He lost his right eye, has severe damage to his left. His life and career were destroyed in an instant.
After Munera's death, there were calls for international action.
Amnesty International called on the U.S. Secretary of State to halt exports of less lethal equipment to Colombia, saying the U.S.'s role in fueling the violence was outrageous.
But these attempts at accountability, they just seem to fail over and over.
They do, often because of jurisdiction. Back in 1991, families of Palestinians who died after Israeli soldiers used tear gas sued U.S. manufacturers. The case was dismissed because a judge said the U.S. had no jurisdiction over events happening overseas.
And even after the 2020 protests here in the U.S., a House Oversight Committee investigated. They concluded the industry is insufficiently regulated, that it exploits a legal void to maximize profits.
A powerful, clear conclusion. But then, the committee made absolutely no recommendations for action at the federal level.
Nothing.
Nothing. Congress did pass a very narrow law banning exports of some equipment to Hong Kong, but sales to almost every other country, and the huge domestic market here.
Yeah.
That all remains fair game.
So if you put it all together, what does it all mean? The core issue seems to be the enduring power of that propaganda campaign from 100 years ago, the false binary.
It is. That campaign successfully convinced leaders in police forces that their only two options are less lethal munitions or lethal force. And that provides this convenient cover for a brutal, shadowy industry that has remained unaccountable to basic safety regulations for decades.
It's an industry that profits directly from tensions in democracies, and it's predicted to grow by more than $3 billion over the next decade. The violence isn't an accident, it's the business model.
So, consider the proven human cost, the decades of evidence showing indiscriminate misuse. We really have to ask, how does this global reliance on weapons that are both unregulated and often unlawfully deployed, how does that fundamentally change the nature of public dissent? What price do fraying democracies ultimately pay when they adopt a military solution sourced from a cynical, unregulated industry to what is, at its heart, a political problem? It's a question that demands a much more honest answer than just less lethal.